Okay, so you've been checking out this whole licensing officer thing, huh? Sounds like quite the dig, right?
Yeah, it's really something. Not just about, stamping forms all day. It's way more interesting than people think.
That's what I'm picking up on. Like, you need some serious skills for this, right?
Hmm.
Legal stuff, customer service, even a bit of detective work.
You're hitting the nail on the head there. It's this wild mix of admin stuff, legal frameworks, and even a bit of investigation. You're making sure licenses are issued responsibly, big responsibility.
No kidding. It's, like you said, it's not just shuffling paper. It's about making sure the right people are getting licenses.
Absolutely. And you need to be a good communicator to make it all work. This functions and core abilities section you shared really highlights active listening, being clear and understandable. Building that trust is key, whether you're talking to an applicant or a whole regulatory body.
Right. Got to keep everyone on the same page. So I'm picturing a licensing officer, and I'm thinking, piles of paperwork, stuffy office,
Yeah.
but it sounds way more dynamic from what you're saying.
Oh, for sure. You're not chained to a desk, that's for sure. It's usually based in a government agency, but you could be working with legal teams one day, then meeting an applicant face to face the next, maybe even collaborating with law enforcement on compliance checks.
Wow. Okay. That is way more exciting than I initially thought. So it's not just a behind-the-scenes kind of job. You're really out there making sure things run smoothly. But like any job, there's got to be pros and cons, right?
100%. On the plus side, the job security is awesome. These roles are in high demand, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon.
That's always good to hear.
But you got to be able to handle stress. You're dealing with complex regulations that are always changing, and things can get pretty intense sometimes.
Makes sense. You'd have to be on top of your game, constantly learning and adapting.
You got it. Speaking of evolving, we got to talk about how tech is changing things for licensing officers. It's not your grandma's licensing office anymore.
Right. No more stacks of paper applications, huh?
Hmm.
So what kind of technology are we talking about here?
Think online application systems, no more drowning in paperwork. Everything's digital, more efficient, less room for errors.
Right. Who needs all that paper anyway?
Exactly. But it goes beyond just digitizing forms. The really cool stuff is in the automated verification processes. Remember how we talked about manually checking everything? Well, now you've got software that does it for you in a flash.
Whoa.
Huh.
So it's like having a super-powered assistant that never sleeps.
Exactly. It's like having x-ray vision for data. This frees up licensing officers to focus on the big picture stuff that requires human judgment, like those tricky investigations and making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
So it's not about robots replacing humans. It's more like robots giving humans superpowers.
Love that analogy. It's all about working smarter, not harder. But this new tech-driven world means aspiring clarity. Licensing officers have got to be tech savvy, like really embrace it.
It's not enough to just know how to use a computer anymore. You got to be excited about technology, always ready to learn new systems, and use those tools to your advantage.
Exactly. And when we're talking about advantages, we got to talk about career progression. There's a whole ladder you can climb in this field.
I like the sound of that. So where does someone even begin? What's the typical entry point for a budding licensing officer?
Well, a lot of folks get their start as a licensing assistant. It's like the first rung on the ladder. You're learning the ropes, getting familiar with the processes, all that good stuff.
It's about paying your dues and building a solid foundation. So what kind of tasks would a licensing assistant be handling on a day-to-day basis?
Think processing applications, running those initial eligibility checks, and giving out basic info about licensing legislation. It's all about building that solid base.
Gotcha. So it's all about learning the ropes, getting comfortable with the everyday tasks. So what's next? Once you've mastered the art of being a licensing assistant, where do you go from there?
Well, once you've paid your dues and proven yourself, you'd likely move up to a full-fledged licensing officer role. That's when you get to really spread your wings and take on more responsibility.
Ah, so that's where the training wheels come off. Sounds like a pretty big jump.
It is. Now you're processing applications independently, conducting those in-depth investigations we talked about, offering more specialized advice, and really taking charge of ensuring compliance.
You're the one in the driver's seat now, making those judgment calls, using your expertise.
Precisely. You're becoming a go-to resource, someone who really knows their stuff. But it doesn't stop there.
Oh, there's more. Tell me more about these higher level positions.
For those with a real knack for this and some ambition, you could become a senior licensing officer, maybe even a licensing manager down the line.
Okay, now those sound like leadership roles. What exactly does a senior licensing officer do differently from a regular one?
It's a whole different ballgame. Now, you're not just managing your workload, but you're also overseeing a whole team of licensing officers, guiding them, mentoring them, making sure everything's running like a well-oiled machine.
So it's a lot more than just knowing the regulations inside and out. You need serious management and leadership skills to excel in a role like that.
You've got it. And on top of that, you're more involved in the strategic side of things, helping to shape department policies, ensuring compliance at a much higher level, handling more complex cases, those kinds of things.
This you're thinking big picture, making sure the entire department is functioning at its best.
Exactly. And then there's the top dog, the licensing manager. They're responsible for, well, pretty much everything.
That's a big job. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Think setting the strategic direction for the whole department, managing budgets, staying on top of the latest laws and regulations, making sure everything is squeaky clean legally, and building relationships with everyone outside the agency. It's a high-stakes role.
Wow. From processing your first application to leading a whole department, it sounds like there's a ton of opportunity for growth in this field.
You said it. It's not just about climbing the ladder, though. It's about the skills you pick up along the way, the knowledge you gain, the connections you make. It's all those things combined that shape your career path.
It's about the journey, not just the destination. Okay, so we've talked about what they do, the career path, how technology plays a role. Now, let's get into some of those questions folks might have, the frequently asked questions.
Let's do it. Hit me with your best shot.
All right, so when we talk about licenses, it's easy to think just driver's licenses or maybe business permits, but it's way broader than that, right?
Oh, yeah, way broader. We're talking professional licenses. Doctors, lawyers, even accountants. Then you've got construction permits, special events, heck, even firearms licenses. It all falls under this umbrella.
Wow. Talk about a variety pack. And it's not just about pushing paper. It's about making sure people are safe, businesses are playing by the rules, and everything's on the up and up.
Exactly. Which brings us to a question that comes up a lot. What are the toughest parts of being a licensing officer? It can't be sunshine and rainbows all the time, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news, right? Denying an application, addressing a violation. That can't be easy.
It definitely takes a certain kind of person. You got to stay calm under pressure, be able to deal with difficult people, and sometimes you got to deliver bad news in a way that doesn't make people want to storm out.
It's a delicate balance, for sure. You're the enforcer, but you're also there to guide and support people through the process.
Exactly. And on top of that, you got to stay up to date with these ever-changing regulations and legal developments. Talk about a challenge.
It's like you're juggling a bunch of things at once and you can't drop any of them.
That's a great way to put it. But when it comes down to it, I think the biggest challenge is finding that balance between enforcing the rules, which are there for a reason, and being understanding and supportive to the people and businesses that you're interacting with.
Right, because behind every application, there's a person with a dream, a family to support, a business they're trying to build. It's about seeing the human side of things while still upholding the law.
100%. It's about being firm but fair, being a resource, not a roadblock. And it's about making sure that the licensing process is clear, easy to understand, and most importantly, fair to everyone.
So you need to be a good communicator, a problem solver, and someone who's got a strong moral compass.
You got it. Now, let's talk about how you even get to be this amazing, multi-talented licensing officer. It's not just about on-the-job training, right?
Right. What about education? What should someone who's thinking about this career path be studying?
Well, a law degree is always a solid bet. It gives you that rock-solid understanding of legal principles, how to interpret regulations, the whole legal shebang.
Makes sense. You're practically swimming in laws and regulations every day, so having that legal background seems like a no-brainer.
Exactly. But it's not the only way to go. You could also look into criminology, public administration, even a business administration degree could be a good fit, depending on your interests.
So there's some flexibility there, which is great. You don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to excel in this field.
Not at all. And don't discount those so-called soft skills you pick up from, say, communication, psychology, or sociology.
Right, because at the end of the day, being a good licensing officer isn't just about knowing the law. It's about knowing how to talk to people, build rapport, understand different perspectives, and handle those tricky situations with grace.
100%. And in this line of work, those people skills are just as important as your legal knowledge, if not more so.
It's like that saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. All right, so we've covered a lot about the core of being a licensing officer, but let's dive into something I find super interesting. specialization. You don't just have to be a generalist in this field, right?
Oh, absolutely not. You can totally niche down,
You
become the go-to expert in a specific area of licensing.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. I love that.
Huh.
So what are some of the areas where a licensing officer might specialize? Give me the inside scoop.
One area that's super hot right now is environmental licensing. It's all about making sure everything's on the up and up with environmental regulations.
So if you're passionate about the environment, sustainability, all that good stuff, this could be right up your alley.
Absolutely. And we're not just talking about those big factories and power plants. We're talking construction projects, noise ordinances, pesticide use, the whole 9 yards.
It's about protecting people and the planet, making sure we're all breathing clean air and drinking clean water. What other areas come to mind?
Another big one, especially these days, is health and safety licensing.
Yeah, that makes sense. With everything going on, health and safety are top of mind for everyone.
Exactly. These licensing officers are like the guardians of public well-being. Think restaurant inspections, making sure construction sites are safe, ensuring hospitals are following all the rules. It's all about protecting people from harm.
So it's a pretty crucial role with a lot of responsibility.
You got it. And with new technologies, new industries popping up all the time, and, well, the world changing so fast, the need for specialized licensing officers is only going to increase.
It's a field that's constantly growing and evolving, which, let's be honest, you love. But speaking of evolving, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier. This whole idea of continuous learning. You can't just rest on your laurels in this line of work, can you?
Not a chance. The world of licensing is constantly changing. New laws, new regs, new tech. You gotta be willing to keep learning and adapting if you want to stay ahead of the game.
So it's all about being a lifelong learner, always curious, always up for a challenge. What are some ways that licensing officers can make sure they're staying current and keeping their skills sharp?
Well, attending those industry conferences and workshops is always a good idea. It's a chance to network with other folks in the field, learn from the best, and get a feel for what's new and exciting.
It's like a crash course in all things licensing. What else?
There are tons of professional development opportunities out there. A lot of organizations offer continuing education courses and certifications specifically for licensing officers.
So you can really geek out and become a specialist in your area.
Exactly. Plus, there are all those online resources, industry publications, blogs, podcasts. Even just following the right people on social media can keep you in the loop.
It's all about being an active participant in the professional community, right?
100%. You've got to stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop learning.
Knowledge is power. Okay, so we've talked about what they do, the career path, the importance of staying up to date. Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The money.
Ah, yes. The age-old question, how much can I expect to make as a licensing officer?
Spill the tea. I know it can vary a lot depending on where you work, how much experience you have, all that good stuff.
You're right, a lot of factors come into play. Location, experience, education, the industry you're in, it all makes a difference.
Right. So let's start at the beginning. What can someone who's just starting out, maybe as a licensing assistant, expect to earn?
Well, generally speaking, entry-level licensing assistants are looking at around $30,000 to $40,000 per year.
Not a bad starting point at all, especially considering you're gaining valuable experience and setting yourself up for a promising career path.
Exactly. And as you climb that ladder, gain more experience, move into that full-fledged licensing officer role, your earning potential starts to climb as well.
Okay, so for those who've paid their dues, put in the time, what's a typical salary range for a mid-level licensing officer?
Typically, you'd be looking at around $45,000 to $65,000 per year.
Now we're talking. That's a nice jump, and it makes sense. More responsibility, more expertise. You should be compensated for that.
100%. And of course, if you set your sights on those leadership positions, those senior licensing officer and licensing manager roles we talked about, you're looking at even higher earning potential.
Okay, let's talk big leagues. What kind of numbers are we talking about for those at the top of their game?
Well, our research shows that a senior licensing officer could be pulling in anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 per year.
Wow. Now, for the top dog, the licensing manager, what kind of salary are we talking about there?
A licensing manager, depending on experience and the size of the organization, could be making upwards of $100,000.
Okay, now that's impressive. So there's definitely room to grow both professionally and financially in this field.
Absolutely. But remember, money isn't everything, right? When you're thinking about a career, you got to consider all those other benefits too, the ones you can't put a price tag on.
Right, things like job satisfaction, work-life balance. feeling like you're making a difference. Those are all important factors to consider, too.
Exactly. It's about finding a job that lights you up, that makes you excited to get out of bed in the morning, something that just feels right.
Well said. Okay, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I want to touch on something that's super important in this field: ethics.
So we were just talking about the importance of ethics, but you know what else is super interesting? The tech side of things. It's really shaking things up for licensing officers.
No kidding. It's amazing how much technology is streamlining this whole field. Remember those automated verification processes we were talking about earlier? I'm dying to know more. Like, how do they actually work?
Oh man, it's seriously cool. Imagine this. Someone's applying for a contractor's license, right? In the old days, a licensing officer would have to check everything by hand, proof of insurance, work history, maybe even run a criminal background check. Super time consuming.
Talk about tedious. And I bet there was a lot of room for human error, right?
Oh, absolutely. But now with these super smart software systems, a lot of that verification happens in the blink of an eye. The software checks the applicant's info against all these different databases. Boom, boom, boom.
So, like instant background check. That's wild. What kind of technology are we talking about here? Are these custom-built programs or something more off the shelf that different agencies can use?
It's a real mix. Some of the bigger agencies have custom-built systems tailored to their specific needs, but there are also a bunch of really powerful, ready-made platforms that are designed specifically for licensing and regulatory bodies. They've got everything: online application portals, automated verification tools, secure document management, even data analytics dashboards so agencies can track trends and all that.
So it's not just about making life easier for licensing officers. It's about improving the whole system, making it more efficient and transparent for everyone.
100%. And for the applicant, it means less waiting around, less paperwork, and a much smoother experience overall.
Everybody wins. But all this automation, it does make you wonder, are robots going to steal all the licensing officer jobs?
Right. It's a question that comes up a lot. But honestly, the general consensus is that technology is here to enhance the role of a licensing officer, not replace it. Think of it like this. You've got this awesome new superpower in the form of all this technology.
I like where you're going with this. So the robots handle the boring stuff so you can focus on what really matters, using your brain and your judgment.
Nailed it. You're not bogged down with paperwork and routine checks anymore. Now you can actually spend time on the stuff that requires a human touch. Digging into complicated cases, guiding people through tricky parts of the regulations, and being that expert everyone needs.
It's like you've got this awesome sidekick who handles all the grunt work, freeing you up to swoop in and be the licensing superhero.
I love it. But listen, just because the robots are doing some of the heavy lifting doesn't mean licensing officers can slack off on the tech front.
Right. You got to keep learning and growing with the technology.
Absolutely. The name of the game is adaptability. You need to be tech savvy, eager to learn new systems, and always looking for ways to use those tools to your advantage.
It's not about fearing the robots. It's about becoming the robot whisperer. Okay, so we've talked about what these licensing officers do daily, the career path, how technology is changing the game. Now I'm really curious about the different stages someone might go through in their career.
Okay, let's map it out. It's super helpful to see how you can grow and evolve your skills in this field. Usually, someone brand new to all this would start as a licensing assistant. It's the perfect way to dip your toes in the water.
Like an apprenticeship, right?
Yep.
You're learning from the pros and gradually taking on more responsibility. What kinds of things would someone at that level be doing?
Think of it as laying the groundwork, processing applications, doing those initial eligibility checks, and being a resource for basic questions about the rules and regulations.
So it's about mastering the basics and getting comfortable with the day-to-day flow. Once you've proven yourself, what's next?
Well, once you've gotten your feet wet, you'd likely move up to a full-on licensing officer role. That's when things get really interesting.
That sounds like a big jump.
It is. Now you're calling the shots, processing applications solo, digging deep into investigations, providing expert advice on the regulations, and making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Okay, so no more training wheels. You're in the driver's seat now.
Exactly. You're the go-to person, the one with the knowledge and the experience, but it doesn't end there. For those who are hungry for more,
Ooh, there's more. Spill the beans.
you could climb the ladder to a senior licensing officer role, maybe even become a licensing manager someday.
Now, those sound like the big leagues. So what makes a senior licensing officer different from a regular one?
It's a whole other level. You're not just managing your own work anymore. You're in charge of a whole team of licensing officers, mentoring them, making sure things run like clockwork.
So you've got leadership and management skills on top of everything else. It's about more than just knowing the rules. It's about leading a team.
Exactly. And you're thinking more strategically now, too. You might be involved in developing new department policies, taking the lead on big investigations, or handling complex cases that require a deep understanding of the law.
So you're thinking big picture, looking at the department as a whole.
You got it. And then there's the top dog, the licensing manager, the one who's responsible for, well, everything.
That's a lot of responsibility.
You said it. We're talking setting the strategic direction for the whole department, managing the budget, ensuring compliance, building relationships with stakeholders. It's a high-impact role for sure.
It sounds like a challenging but incredibly rewarding career path with lots of room for growth.
Absolutely. And what's really cool is that it's not just about the titles or the promotions. It's about the journey. It's the skills you build, the knowledge you accumulate, the connections you make along the way. That's what really shapes your career.
Love that. It's about the journey, not just the destination.
100%. And in a field like this, where things are constantly evolving, being a lifelong learner is key. You've got to stay curious, be open to new ideas, and always be ready to level up your skills.
Okay, so we've talked about the day-to-day, the career path, all that good stuff. But I think it's time to tackle some of those common questions people might have. You know, those frequently asked questions that always pop up.
Hit me with them. I'm ready to clear up any confusion.
All right, so one question I hear a lot is, what kinds of licenses do licensing officers actually work with? Because when most people think about licenses, they think driver's licenses or maybe a business license. But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's way more diverse than people realize. We're talking everything from professional licenses, doctors, lawyers, you name it, to permits for construction projects, special events, even firearms. The list goes on and on.
Wow, talk about a mixed bag. So it's not just about paperwork. It's about public safety, making sure businesses are playing by the rules, really covering a lot of ground.
Absolutely. Which brings us to another question I get a lot. What are some of the toughest things about being a licensing officer? Because it can't be all smooth sailing.
Right. Like sometimes you got to be the bad guy. Right. Denying an application or dealing with someone who's not happy about a violation, that can't be easy.
You're telling me. It takes a certain kind of person to handle those situations with grace and stay professional. Dealing with difficult people, navigating these complex regulations, and staying on top of all the legal stuff, those are all par for the course. But you know what I think the real challenge is?
What's that?
It's striking that balance between enforcing the rules, because at the end of the day, that's your job, and being supportive and understanding of the people and the businesses you're dealing with.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Right.
You have to be firm, but fair, knowledgeable, but approachable.
Exactly. And you always want to make sure that the licensing process is crystal clear, easy to understand, and most importantly, fair to everyone.
So it's not just about knowing the rules. It's about knowing how to apply them fairly and compassionately.
You nailed it. It's about remembering that behind every application is a person with hopes and dreams and a business they're trying to build.
Speaking of building a career, let's talk about the education side of things.
Yeah.
I know we touched on it earlier, but it's worth diving into a bit deeper. It's not all just on-the-job training, is it?
Right. Hands-on experience is definitely key, but having a good educational foundation under your belt can give you a serious leg up in this field.
Okay, so for those who are considering this career path, what are some of the degrees or areas of study that would be most beneficial?
Well, you can't go wrong with a law degree. It arms you with a deep understanding of legal principles, how to interpret those sometimes hairy regulations, and just a general understanding of how the whole legal system operates.
Makes perfect sense. You're swimming in laws and regulations every day, so having that solid legal background seems like a no-brainer.
Absolutely. But it's not the only game in town. Criminology, public administration, even a business administration degree could be a great fit, depending on your interests and what you want to specialize in down the line.
So there's some wiggle room, which is great. Don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to rock this role.
You got it. And don't underestimate the power of those so-called soft skills you pick up from studying things like communications, psychology, even sociology.
Right. Because at the end of the day, being a successful licensing officer isn't just about knowing the rules inside and out. It's about knowing how to talk to people.
100%.
Right.
Being able to communicate effectively, build rapport, understand different perspectives, those skills are pure gold in this line of work.
It's about understanding that behind every interaction, There's a human being with feelings, frustrations, and a unique story.
Absolutely. It's about human connection as much as it is about regulations and compliance.
Beautifully said. Now let's jump into something I find incredibly fascinating about this field. Specialization. You don't have to be a jack of all trades in this line of work, do you?
Nope, not at all. You can absolutely niche down, become a total rock star in a specific area of licensing.
All right, so give me the lowdown. What are some of the areas where a licensing officer might choose to specialize?
Well, one area that's super hot right now is environmental licensing. It's all about making sure everyone is playing by the rules when it comes to protecting the environment.
So if you're passionate about sustainability, protecting Mother Earth, this could be the perfect niche for you.
Totally. And it's not just about those big factories and power plants. Environmental licensing covers everything from construction projects to noise ordinances to pesticide use. We're talking big picture here.
It's about safeguarding our planet and making sure we leave a healthy world for future generations. What else you got? What other areas might a licensing officer choose to focus on?
Another big one these days is health and safety licensing.
Yeah, that makes total sense. With everything going on in the world, health and safety have never been more important.
Exactly. These licensing officers are like the unsung heroes of public health. Think restaurant inspections, construction site safety checks, making sure hospitals are following all the protocols. It's all about protecting people.
So it's a pretty crucial role, making sure businesses prioritize the health and safety of their workers and the public.
You got it. And with new technologies emerging, new industries popping up all the time, the need for specialized licensing officers is only going to grow. It's a field that's constantly evolving.
Which I know you love. But speaking of evolving, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier. Continuous learning. You can't just coast in this line of work, can you?
No way. This field is constantly changing, new laws, new regulations, new technologies popping up all the time. You've got to be a lifelong learner if you want to stay ahead of the curve.
So how can licensing officers make sure they're staying current?
Attending those industry conferences and workshops is always a good idea. It's a chance to network, learn from the best, and see what's new and noteworthy.
It's like a crash course in all things licensing. What else?
A lot of professional organizations offer continuing education courses and certifications that are specifically designed for licensing officers.
So you can really geek out and become a specialist in your area.
Yeah. You got it. And then there are all those readily available online resources, industry publications, blogs, podcasts. Heck, even just following the right folks on social media can help you stay in the loop.
Right. It's about staying connected to the professional community and never being afraid to ask questions.
100%. The more you learn, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this ever-changing field.
Knowledge is power. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground about what licensing officers do, how to become one, how technology plays a role. Now let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, money.
Okay, let's talk dollars and cents. I know everyone wants to know. How much can I realistically expect to earn as a licensing officer?
Right. Spill the tea. And I know it's not a one-size-fits-all answer because
Yeah.
a lot of factors come into play.
Totally. Where you live, how much experience you have, your education level, the specific industry you're in, they all make a difference.
Right. So let's break it down. Let's start with those who are just starting out, maybe as a licensing assistant. What's a realistic salary range for someone at that level?
Typically, an entry-level licensing assistant can expect to make around $30,000 to $40,000 a year.
Not bad for a starting point, especially when you consider that you're gaining valuable experience and building a solid foundation for a promising career.
Exactly. And as you progress in your career, gain more experience, and move into a full-fledged licensing officer role, your earning potential starts to climb.
Makes sense. So what about those mid-level licensing officers, the ones who have been around the block a few times? What kind of salary are we talking about for them?
A licensing officer with a few years of experience under their belt could be looking at a salary range of around $45,000 to $65,000 a year.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
That's a nice jump from the entry-level position, and it reflects the increased responsibility and expertise that comes with those mid-level roles.
For sure. And then, of course, for those high achievers who set their sights on those leadership positions like senior licensing officer or licensing manager, the earning potential gets even sweeter.
Okay, now we're getting to the good part. Let's talk big money. What can those at the top of their game expect to earn?
Well, based on our research, a senior licensing officer could be bringing in anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 annually.
Wow. Now, for the head honcho, the licensing manager, what kind of salary are we talking about?
A licensing manager, depending on their experience and the size of the organization, could be looking at a salary upwards of $100,000 per year.
Okay, now that's impressive. So there's definitely room to grow your career and your bank account in this field.
Absolutely. But, you know, when you're thinking about your career path, money shouldn't be the only thing that matters.
Right. You've got to love what you do. Things like job satisfaction, work-life balance, feeling like you're making a difference in the world, those are all super important too.
100%. It's about finding that sweet spot, a career that not only pays the bills, but also lights you up inside and makes you excited to go to work every day.
Well said. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to touch on something super important, especially in a field like this. Ethics.
Ethics. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about knowing how to use them the right way.
Exactly. And that can be tricky sometimes. It's not always black and white, right?
You hit the nail on the head. There are so many gray areas in licensing, so many situations where you have to really think through the implications of your decisions.
Because it's not just paperwork we're talking about here.
Right. These decisions, they impact real people's lives, their businesses, their livelihoods. You got to be able to sleep at night, you know?
Absolutely. So let's talk about how a licensing officer can navigate those tricky situations ethically. What are the guiding principles here?
Well, first and foremost, you got to be impartial. Every single applicant deserves to be treated fairly and equally, no matter what.
No playing favorites, no letting personal biases creep in. Everyone gets a fair shake.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just treating everyone the same. Sometimes you got to recognize that different folks might need different kinds of support to navigate the process successfully.
Okay, so like someone applying for their first business license might need a little more hand-holding than someone who's been through it a dozen times.
Exactly. You've got to be able to adjust your approach while still being fair to everyone. And that ties into another key element of ethical licensing: transparency.
Meaning being open and honest about how the process works, what the requirements are, and why decisions are made.
Exactly. No smoke and mirrors, no hidden agendas. Everything should be clear, concise, and easy to understand, both for the applicant and for anyone else who might be looking in from the outside.
That makes sense. It builds trust and ensures that everything is on the up and up.
Right. And when people trust that the system is fair and transparent, they're more likely to cooperate even when they don't get the answer they were hoping for.
Okay, so we've got impartiality, we've got transparency. What else? What's the third pillar of ethical licensing?
Integrity. That's the big one. A licensing officer's word has to be their bond.
They got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. Be honest in all your dealings, uphold the highest ethical standards, and always, always put the public's best interests first.
Even when it's tough.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, there will be pressure, there will be temptations, and sometimes you'll be faced with those ethical dilemmas where there's no easy answer.
Oh, absolutely. Those are the moments when your integrity is truly put to the test. And that's when it's more important than ever to stick to your guns, to fall back on your training and your moral compass.
To do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, as a licensing officer, you're not just upholding regulations, you're upholding the public's trust. And that's a pretty awesome responsibility.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the ins and outs of being a licensing officer, the skills you need, the career path, the importance of ethics. Now, let's take a peek into the future, shall we?
Yeah.
With technology changing faster than ever, what do you think the future holds for licensing officers?
$1 million question, right? It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's certain. Technology is going to keep shaking things up.
We've already seen it happening with online applications, automated verifications, all those fancy digital tools we talked about.
Exactly. And as those tools get even smarter, even more powerful, I think we're going to see a big shift towards using data to make decisions in the licensing process.
So less reliance on gut feeling, more reliance on hard data.
Exactly. Data can help make the process fairer, more objective, and a whole lot more efficient.
Makes sense. But does that mean robots are going to replace licensing officers altogether? Is that the future we're looking at?
You know, it's a question that comes up a lot, and it's a valid concern. But personally, I don't think robots are going to be taking over anytime soon. In fact, I think the opposite might happen.
Oh.
Tell me more.
Think about it. As technology takes over more of those routine, repetitive tasks, the human skills of a licensing officer become even more important. So it's not about being replaced by robots. It's about becoming more human, more in tune with those uniquely human skills that robots can't replicate.
Now you're getting it. It's about being A problem solver, a critical thinker, a communicator, an ethical decision maker, those are the skills that will set you apart in the future.
So it's like this beautiful dance between technology and humanity, each one complementing and enhancing the other.
I love that. The licensing officers of the future, they're not going to be replaced by robots. They're going to be the ones working side by side with technology, using it to be even more efficient, more effective, and more human in their interactions.
That's a future I can get behind.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about this fascinating field. We've explored the day-to-day tasks, the career paths, the impact of technology, and the crucial role of ethics.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
It's a career path filled with challenges, rewards, and endless opportunities for growth.
For anyone who's passionate about public service, loves to learn, and wants a job that truly makes a difference, I can't think of a more fulfilling path.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving into the world of licensing officers with you today.
The pleasure was all mine.
And for those of you listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those licenses legal.